Welcome to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. This is the podcast where we discuss the cutting edge of growing from a science-based perspective and draw on top experts from around the industry to share their wisdom and knowledge. My podcast this week is with Virginia Emery. Virginia is the founder and CEO of Beta Hatch, a pioneering insect farming company that is industrializing insects for agriculture. Beta Hatch is fueled by a passion to see insects reach their true potential in our food systems. The company has grown to be internationally recognized for its scientific approach to scaling insect production and operates North America's largest mealworm farm for animal feed production in Washington. Virginia is the country's most innovative insect entrepreneur, recently recognized as a Visionary Grist 50 fixer. Virginia has a PhD in entomology from the University of California, Berkeley, and has been awarded over 20 grants and honors and is published on subjects ranging from chemical communication to genetics to insect behavior. Her life's mission is to breed a bug that tastes like bacon. Some highlights of Frass use in relation to cannabis production are the following. It's a clean product ideal for indoor growing. Because their insects are grown indoors in climate-controlled conditions on organic feed, there is no risk of pests, heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides coming into the greenhouse. It's a highly soluble source of nitrogen, immediately available to plants. Their studies have shown increases in leafing and fruiting. Unlike a conventional mineral fertilizer, Frass contains small concentrations of micronutrients like copper, zinc, and manganese. Studies suggest the addition of Frass stimulates soil microbial activity, especially when it is mixed with mineral fertilizer, suggesting a synergistic effect between both. Taken together, results indicate that Frass has a great potential to be used as a partial or complete substitute for mineral NPK fertilizer. Their Frass is produced locally in Washington State in a zero waste system and is Emery and USDA certified organic. Now on to the show. Hey Virginia, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about insect Frass and insect rearing and production. Can we start off though by telling listeners a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I am an entomologist by training, so I'm a bug expert. They call me the bug lady in Seattle, where I've been sharing my business for a couple of years. My company is Beta Hatch, and we farm insects as a sustainable protein. And one of the great co-products of our process is Frass. Frass is the word of the day today. It's the technical term for insect poop. So we have a saying at Beta Hatch that Frass happens. And the company's been a couple years under development. I started working on this in 2015, and we've been operating commercially for about 4 years. I got started with the business because as an entomologist, about 99% of what you work on is how to kill bugs. We kind of have this very antagonistic relationship with insects, and it's really leaving a lot on the table. I mean, bugs do incredible things as far as ecosystem services for us, and everyone's very familiar with pollination, but organic waste recycling and nutrition is an area that we see a lot of missed opportunities. And so that's what Beta Hatch has been working on, is just making sure that insects can be part of that circular and regenerative food system.
So when you started Beta Hatch, is there a reason that you chose mealworms as your main, insect source of Frass or for breaking down material versus some of the other options out there like black soldier flies?
Yeah, well, so I guess there's the technical reasons that I could quote you. Our bugs are dry adapted. They've got a lot of genome diversity, which is useful for breeding. They can eat all kinds of feedstocks, break down mycotoxins. There's all kinds of things like that I could quote. But sort of the initial start, which is probably more fun for your listeners, is that I started off growing bugs in a little shed at my house in Ballard. We called it the Ballard Bug Barn. It was basically a little climate controlled shed that I grew a couple dozen species of bugs in while I was experimenting at first. And one of the big things that was a first sign that the mealworm was going to be a good species to work with happened over the summer. when I went away and had neglected some of my insect colonies because I had been out on vacation. And when I came back, most of the bugs were in trouble. In the case of some flies, had literally flown away. But the mealworms were just happy and contented. And a few months later, found a box that I had neglected for even longer, and stuffed away sort of back on a shelf, and they were also doing just fine. These are really hardy insects, and so that was the first I guess indications that the mealworm was going to be a really great insect that could handle all kinds of the challenges that we've run into as we work to scale up production. They're just really hardy bugs that can basically withstand very cold, very hot temperatures, all kinds of humidity levels, and can eat almost anything. So it's they're a really nice insect to work with from if you're a smaller producer just looking to get started producing bugs, one of the easiest ones to work with. But then also from an industrial standpoint, where we're working with beta hatch, they're super amenable to automation, and there's a lot of reasons that it's actually a lot cheaper to produce them. So yeah, I mean, I'd encourage anyone who's interested in trying out raising some bugs. Mealworms are a great place to start.
So I would like to hear from you about what, or I guess how a home user may be able to start incorporating mealworms into their, their goals for sustainability with composting. But before we do, can you talk a little bit, when you said that mealworms are really good eating a wide variety of food sources, what sorts of things do you
Yeah.
feed your mealworms, and what are they best known for in terms of consuming?
Yeah, so we're pretty focused on ensuring that what we're doing is as sustainable as possible. So we've been looking at industrial co-products and byproducts, mostly from food processing. At our facility in Kashmir, Washington, we're actually one of the ingredients we use is a apple byproduct. We're in the Wenatchee Valley; it's the apple capital, and there's an apple processor just down the road from us. It's probably less than a mile to go and get that feedstock, which is incredibly short supply chain. So they can eat actually a huge range of things. We've looked at over 100 different ingredients, and there's nothing we found that they can't eat. They can actually even eat plastic. And so, we've been, from an industrial and sort of commercial perspective, focused on feedstocks that make sense for us economically, but also from a sustainability standpoint, trying to make sure that as we're looking at inputs, we're trying to find the ones that have both the lowest cost, but also the lowest environmental footprints, and making sure we're not diverting food from other sources, such as other animal feeds. The mealworms are stored grain pests, so they've been living for millennia with us in our stored grain. And so, the common things people think about are oats and wheat and those grains that you might have found a stray insect in before. And certainly, we've done a really good job of eliminating them as a stored grain pest. Um, but that's sort of their history of how they've evolved for eating. But because they've been these scavengers in many ways, they have incredible digestive powers. They're like little bioreactors, and the gut microbes and all the things living in their guts allow them to break down all kinds of stuff. And as I said, even plastic, the only known way to biodegrade polystyrene or styrofoam is in the gut of a mealworm. So it's a pretty incredible set of things that they can be eating.
Now, is there any risk of pests or pathogens with mealworm production or rearing?
Well, it's an interesting question. We're very much farmers in a typical sense. We've got a crop. We worry about the pests and disease that can impact them. They can get sick just like anything else, viruses and bacteria. And in our case, pest control of just making sure that we don't have any other insects coming in is a big concern. We've basically made paradise for bugs. Everyone wants to live there, so we have to be really careful about ensuring we don't have any pests established in our facility. Um, but it's also very different than a lot of traditional farming because it's completely indoors. We control every aspect of production from the inputs, the growing process, the sort of manufacturing pieces that just allow us to separate out the product. it's a lot more like a factory kind of setting, almost like a clean room setting, than it is a farm with soil. So it's kind of an interesting place to, um, we kind of straddle that divide between being a farmer and being a manufacturer. But the beauty of that indoor production is that because we have total control over the process and the inputs, there's very minimal risk in our products. So that means both from a pathogen standpoint, the microbial components, and then there's no residues of soils or risk of things like heavy metals in the products. So across the board, because we have such a great control over how we're growing these mealworms, we can actually ensure a much safer product for both our feed products, where the mealworms themselves are being used as feed. We can ensure that there's been no bioaccumulation of any kind of toxins. We can make sure that it's everything we're doing is organically produced, and so we source organic ingredients for our process, and so everything is certified organic. And then on the fertilizer side, the Frass side of the equation, we can also ensure there's no pests or pathogens in there. So this is basically a micro manure where you're not going to have any kind of risk of any kind of insects or other microbial issues that might be of concern to anyone who's using the products.
Yeah, we probably should back up and talk about what the end products are from your mealworm production, and then also what the life cycle of a mealworm is.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about here. The mealworms. I'll start with the life cycle. The mealworm, as it's commonly known, is not a worm at all. It's an insect, and the adult is a beetle. So it's similar to how a butterfly will go through this transformation of being a caterpillar to a cocoon or pupal stage into the adult, which is a butterfly that lays an egg. We have a beetle that lays eggs. Those hatch into the larva, also known as the mealworms, and that's the main product we harvest. And then a subset of our system, we are breeding these insects, and so we allow them to go through pupation. They become pupa. They kind of look like little aliens in the pupal stage, and then those guys will turn into adults, and the cycle continues. And so that whole process can take as long as a few months or as short as a few weeks, depending on how we handle them and treat them and what we're feeding them. Typically, we're looking at around 2 months from egg to product in our case. And as we're growing them, the main product is the mealworms, the larvae themselves. And so we harvest those mealworms as a nutritious, high protein, high fat feed ingredient for animals. We're really focused right now on backyard birds. So anyone who's got a flock at home, this is a fantastic way to give a big nutritional boost to your birds. Certified organic, made right here in Washington. And so the larvae are the feed ingredient. They're great for poultry, but also great for fish. And increasingly, we're exploring a lot of options in pet food. So even cats and dogs love mealworms. So that's the bug piece of the equation. And then, of course, as they're growing, they're producing frass. So just as any other animal that's growing, they'll produce some kind of manure type products. Some kind of, we call it waste, of course. We have this, vocabulary around waste, which, in my opinion, I think is going to eventually be eliminated. Everything we think of as waste now, we're increasingly finding uses for all of our wastes, because we see, anywhere there's a product that's coming out of some sort of system, there's an opportunity for someone else. And so that's also where Beta Hatch has been really looking at the supply chain, trying to say, hey, where can we find a waste byproduct and take that, feed it to our insects, and create something of real value. And so those products are the mealworms as a feed, and the frass as a fertilizer.
Yeah, I know, having been a former feed store owner up until last year, we sold a ton of dried mealworms,
Yeah.
literally. And we call it chicken crack, is what a lot of the
Yes.
backyard chicken owners called it, because chickens will go crazy for it. Very high in protein, which is good for egg production as a
Yep.
supplement to their diet. But what I didn't realize was a lot of the ones that we were ordering in our supply chain were coming out of China, which
Yep.
potentially, from what I was reading, and I'm not an expert on this, but there's a lot more risks of toxins, heavy metals from the production methods that are being used over there because there's a lot less oversight versus, say,
Yeah.
something here in the States.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty unknown, but every single dried mealworm that's on the market today, except for the products with our customer Chubby Mealworm, is from China. So all of the dried mealworms that you see, even if they say they might have been packaged in the US, they were grown in China. We're the only domestic producer of mealworms for backyard birds. And so we have been really trying to try to bring awareness to this, the fact that, this treat that a lot of backyard bird owners are super excited to give to their flock, because yeah, it is chicken crack. They love it. But that's coming from China, and there are some responsible producers for sure. But there's also just a lot of unknowns. And I actually have been in China and visited some of these operations. There's just a kind of different approach and standard to production. So, to give you a case in point, even the interpretation of the rules can be a little, I guess, lost in translation. We visited a facility. They said, oh, yeah, we're only giving pre consumer grocery waste to our insects. And, as I'm touring the operation, it was pretty clear. It looked like they were just eating garbage. There's bits of glass and plastic. And they kept reassuring me, like, no, no, it's all pre consumer grocery waste, which is what the rules are for responsible production according to the FDA. The thing that was lost in translation here is they weren't actually depackaging any of that grocery waste. So they were just grinding up,
Oh, yeah.
plastic containers and glass bottles with whatever that organic material was and giving that to the insects. Well, if the insects are actively digesting and eating plastic, that's getting into the product. And who knows what other kinds of, contaminants or things could be getting in there. So, yeah, there's definitely some concerns with, relying on that foreign supply chain for something that people are putting in their bodies. And so that's why we're super excited to get to market with our American grown mealworms. They're organically produced. Everything that we're giving our insects is certified organic. So we have ensured from the inputs to the end products that we're making, everything is food grade, certified organic, and grown right here in Washington State from waste ingredients. So it's a not only domestically produced, but complete transparency and trust of, just knowledge of what's going into our insects. And that's something that we think is really important for anyone who's grown birds, that, if you're going to harvest eggs and, enjoy having backyard birds, you want them to be as healthy as possible. And so that's why we've seen such great opportunities with our business, and we actually can't grow fast enough. It's a great problem to have. um, and one of the reasons we're scaling up our production.
That is great. I didn't realize you were the only domestic producers. I mean, I think I met you, probably 4 or 5 years ago now at the Flower and Garden Show, and you were still kind
Hmm.
of, getting production established and things like that. So I'm glad we were able to circle back on that. One thing
Yeah.
you touched on just now was how the feedstock will affect the final product, whether it's the mealworm itself or its frass. Do you have any more information about that? Like, has there been any research done, or have you seen that NPK values, for example, will vary based on what you feed the mealworms?
Oh, absolutely. We've, this is one of those challenges with marketing any kind of fertilizer product. You have sort of a guaranteed minimum on your label. But we often are exceeding those numbers as far as our NPK. So we guarantee a 232, but we've measured close to 555 in with some feedstock. So yeah, what you put in really changes what you get out. We're trying to get a firm number set for our new facility so that we can hopefully adjust some of those numbers accordingly. But effectively, yeah, what you're feeding the insects is going to change the quality of the frass. One thing that doesn't change, though, about the frass, regardless of what the NPK value looks like, is that it's a product rich in chitin. And so there's a lot of benefits to sort of the non those macronutrients that get a lot of attention, but there's micronutrients and other components that can have these other benefits. So there's a lot of known benefits on controlling nematodes because you can activate um, chitin feeding microbes in the soil when you are providing a source of chitin as you get in frass. And so then that can help lead to biocontrol of things like nematodes and some of the other pests that can affect different types of crops. Yeah, magnesium's another nutrient that we certify in our products. So the frass has at least a half percentage of magnesium, which is really important for the fruiting of tomatoes and other nightshades and plenty of other plants. So there's not just the NPK, but a lot of other, I guess, interesting interactions between frass and the soil when you use it as a fertilizer and as a soil amendment.
That's great. So, one question I had, do you know anything about the microbial content of the final frass? Have you guys looked at that at all from a biological perspective?
Yeah, we've started to dig in there a little bit more. We actually have a microbiologist on staff, and so she's been really digging into just all the microbial interactions with our bugs and in the products. We do know that we certify each batch, making sure that there's no pathogenic microbes like E. coli that are going to be a problem. But we do know there is a rich community of microbes there, and we're trying to learn as much as we can about how that impacts the soil. We've done some testing with compost teas. We certainly know that as a stimulator for compost, Frass can really help enrich and feed a compost to get it started and producing a healthy microbial consortia. But as I'm sure you know, with microbes, it's just this small world we're barely scratching the surface of. So we're just, starting to learn the importance and value of microbes in soils. And we're, part of that revolution of trying to really think about fertilizers and soil amendments and soil in a more, I guess, community focused way where we're looking at the community of microbes and trying to think about what that looks like. So, I think this is an area we're really excited in the next growing season to do more field tests on. And we're always looking for testing partners to, help get some independent third party testing of the products done.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Um, and one of the questions that I wanted to go back to was also how do people, if they want to say rear mealworms themselves, how would you go about doing that? Any recommendations for I don't know, websites or books or even just a quick how to right now or the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of great resources online. I've seen lots of really interesting YouTube channels, people getting really elaborate in their home setups. Mealworms are really easy. You can grow them in a shoebox, basically. Although I wouldn't recommend a cardboard shoebox because they can eat through the cardboard. But the two resources I would point people to, um, one is a group, Katerina Unger's a great entrepreneur who's done a lot of work on insects, more of the food focus, but absolutely there's an opportunity for those insects to be, they've been really interested in helping people get it in their diet directly. But just if you're not ready for that, getting it into your bird's diet. And so her company On Farm has actually a little desktop version. They call it the Hive, which is a little ready-made kit for growing mealworms. So that's a great place for people to get started. There was also a project called Open Bug Farm that the current folks that were working on that project have moved on to other things, but I believe that's still an active resource with a lot of online um, different forums with questions, and they had an active community of people who were on this sort of small scale looking to grow bugs, contributing their know-how. And so that's another resource that I would recommend people check out. But the internet is full of great and wonderful things, and certainly the wealth of knowledge around farming bugs at home has really grown. So I'd recommend, yeah, YouTube's got plenty of interesting, great explainers as well.
So in theory, like an average, residential family of four could create a small little mealworm setup and recycle some of their waste into potentially more useful product, I guess, for their garden.
Yeah, it's possible. I will say, one of the challenges, and this is true of any kind of home compost kind of operation, or any setup you're trying to do to recycle your waste, is a question of volume and just sort of time and ability to take care of whatever it is that's helping you break down any kind of organic waste you have. um I would say mealworms are they can eat almost anything, but they still need to be fed in a particular way, and they're animals. They need care on a fairly frequent basis. And so absolutely would encourage anyone who's interested in trying this out to give it a go. But you can also just buy our mealworms if it's something that you're finding a little intimidating. As far as thinking about how to get a little home setup going, I would actually suggest, if you're looking, composting is a great way to, I think, be looking at recycling some of your organic waste. And there's some interesting stuff going on with black soldier fly, which handles a much more wet waste, which is typically what most people's kitchen waste is like. Um, and that's another, the black soldier fly is a type of fly. So they produce a larva that, as I said, lives in more of this kind of wet feed. The challenge is, of course, that they're fly. So getting a reliable breeding system going for black soldier fly on a home basis can be a little challenging, especially in the winter. But there's plenty of different suppliers that you can buy animals from, both the black soldier fly or mealworm or any other type of bug that you're interested in growing. There's a pretty active live market that's actually seen a lot of growth through the last year, because there's been this huge surge in interest in backyard birds and homesteading. So I'm very excited to see that trend. I hope it continues into 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, I got to tour a facility up in Vancouver that grows black soldier fly and produces
Oh, nice.
insect frass, and it was pretty cool
Yeah.
to see. I didn't, when I first started looking into this, I didn't realize that black soldier fly adults, when they're in the fly form, they don't eat, so they don't transmit the same diseases that your traditional house fly it gets attributed to,
Yeah.
which
Yep.
was really interesting. And so I tried raising black soldier flies. I bought one of those protopod larva things, and I
Yep.
had no luck getting any
Ah,
naturalization here in the Seattle area. But apparently, some people have. I tried for a couple
okay.
seasons and finally gave up on that. But I know some people in certain areas are like, "Oh, black soldier flies are everywhere. They contaminate my compost pile," is how some people look at it. But
Yep.
they are pretty amazing creatures. And I just want to mention, so we do, through Kiss Organics, we do have a black soldier fly frass that we offer, as well as we're going to start offering the beta hatch mealworm product as well, which I'm really excited about too,
Yeah.
after looking at it. So
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because the word frass is just, it's a term for bug poop. But slightly different process here. So the mealworm frass is actually pure frass. We sift it out in a way that we're basically getting little tiny granules of bug poop. People used to ask, like, how do you collect it? And I made the joke, well, we just have lots of tiny little doggy bags. And but it looks kind of like sand, right? So if this is a podcast, people aren't really seeing what we're talking about. You can kind of just imagine probably people are imagining, um when they've looked at their compost pile and what that looks like, with a bunch of maggots in there and that kind of thing. It's a very clean operation, inside and controlled. The products, and just so that everyone again can sort of imagine what they look like, the mealworms, it just looks like a little, about an inch long, a little larva, very, kind of like a little half crescent moon, inch long, little dried, almost, they almost look like a snack, like a Chex Mix sort of ingredient.
yeah,
And then the mealworm frass is basically like a sand, so it's a really easy to apply because it's that pure frass. It has a really good and consistent nutritional value. Black soldier fly frass, sometimes has a mix of other inputs in it because the diet is harder to separate from the frass, but it's also a great ingredient for any kind of soil amendment or fertilization. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely hope that your listeners are interested in trying it out in their gardens.
Yeah, it's definitely a larger sized and more varied amendment in terms of the way it looks compared to the insect frass that we're talking about with the mealworms. Your product
Yep.
is much finer. It's very obvious when you look at them side by side, and they have slightly
Yeah.
different NPK levels as well, like
Yep.
you mentioned, and I assume a different consortia of microbes. When we,
Yeah.
I had.
I haven't
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna say I haven't seen any work on it yet comparing these two kind of the two products, but there's some really interesting work coming out of Europe and parts of Asia as well, where there's been a lot of good independent science and data on frass, both mealworm frass and black soldier fly frass. And like you're asking about the microbes, this is kind of like all the things that we can't see that are in there having these benefits. And they've been finding some really interesting, compelling, um, I guess, value to frass that's beyond just the MPK. So one of the studies was published actually in Nature as part of their group of journals, and they looked at mealworm frass and found when you take a control group where it's just exactly the same MPK profile, and you take the frass group outperforms the NPK group. So when you look at a nutritionally equivalent control that's not derived from frass, there's something that's sort of inexplicable something, and there's definitely that question of, is this a microbe, is it the chitin, what's happening that's basically creating this biostimulant effect in the plants. And that's something that mechanistically is still being looked into, but it's pretty clear from all the growth trials that there's something there that's causing better plant performance. And we've seen that in our tests too. We just did a bunch of field trials. One of my favorites, I grew a bunch of jalapenos at my house this summer. I have way more than I know what to do with. So I don't know if you have any good salsa recipes,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm flush with jalapenos now because of this growth test. But one of the surprising results is that we actually got twice as many fruits that were twice as large with our frass treatment. And we ran, a negative control and also a positive control against a couple other just commercial products that are and did made sure everything was nutrient similar as far as NPK goes, and we got this extra fruit production. And so it's kind of, again, hard to pinpoint why, but we know that that's a real effect that we're seeing with the use of frass.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point when we talk about the biological aspects of it. And one thing I'd like to touch on is that you mentioned at the end is that you do need to take into account the NPK value when formulating or adding it into your soil. But
Yep.
assuming you're doing that, I think you guys are recommending around a cup per cubic foot is a safe rate for
Yeah. I
frass
mean,
application.
as far as the safe rate, because it's got this, pretty mellow nutrient concentration, this isn't a fertilizer that's going to burn your plants or cause any issues with over application. In the same way that you would see with, say, like a synthetic fertilizer. So, yeah, typically about a cup per cubic foot is a great application rate. Um, but even a teaspoon or a tablespoon in a cubic foot can have an impact based on some of the work that we've done. So, yeah, again, that intangible. I mean, oh man, I'd love to do a follow up next year after we've done a little more research and started to
Yeah.
understand the microbial component, because yeah, there's a lot to look into there. Where one of the tests we're going to be doing this coming fall is actually looking at frass in Martian soil. So we're really interested in the application of what we do to space travel, thinking about closed loop and closed food production systems. And so we've ordered some simulated Martian soil. It's developed by the Jet Propulsion Lab, and we're going to be using our frass to fertilize it and get a sense of how it performs as basically a source of nutrition in an otherwise sterile kind of soil. So I should have some updates on that trial in a couple months for you.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I look forward to hearing that. That's really cool. I know that from working with some researchers in a lab up in Canada, they looked at black soldier fly frass and found in this particular producer good levels of calcium solubilizing and phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. So I think there is a lot to be said for the microbes that are being excreted, or the gut
Yep.
microbes from these insects, as like you said, that sort of intangible benefit that we're still. I don't know that we'll ever learn all the mechanisms of soil science, or insects for that matter, but there is something to it beyond just the NPK values of the product itself, for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And we're definitely really interested in nitrogen fixing bacteria. We know, like, basically we've done some genomic analysis. We know each of these players are there and present. It's just that question of how abundant are they? What are they doing? And with the frass in the soil, those are the kind of questions we're trying to dig into a bit more and trying to figure out if we can boost those beneficial microbes a little bit more in the product. But yeah, lots to learn. It's a really exciting time to be involved in insect agriculture.
Yeah, so when people are using it with their plants, are they just, you said teaspoon, tablespoon, or even a cup per cubic foot? Are they mixing it in prior to planting, or are people using it as a top dress? Are there any like best practices that you've seen with this particular fertilizer?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend if you can blend it in, that's great. It will work as a top dress as well. It has a fraction of the nutrients, of course, that are soluble and will sort of water in. But you'll see, of course, some of that. It doesn't dissolve completely, so it'll stay on the surface as you water it in over a few days or a few weeks. But the nutrition from the frass is still getting into the soil, even with the top dress. So it's a fairly flexible product in that sense. We've done trials even at larger scale with traditional field farm equipment for dispensing fertilizer, and that's a top dress application, and it's gotten really good results that way. So we know both, blending and mixing if you can at the beginning of the season is the best way to make sure that those nutrients are near the roots where you really need to have that nutrition. But a top dress, also just sort of as a mid-season addition, is also a great way to use frass as well. And I should also say we've used it indoors fairly often. It doesn't have really any kind of odor, and you can be using this. I use it on my indoor plants, so there's a lot of broad ranges of applications for the frass that we produce, and we're really excited to be able to start making more in the next year as our new big bug factory gets opened up in Kashmir. So we're very excited. Next season's going to be lots of frass out there. Hopefully, growing lots of great food for people here in Washington and beyond.
I'm looking to next season as well, for a variety of reasons with everything going on in the world these days.
Yeah,
Next year will definitely be a better year. One
hopefully,
question
yes.
I wanted to ask you: do you see with these top dressing applications, due to the biology in the frass, are you seeing like mycelial growth or mold over time growing
We've
from
never
the
seen that.
frass?
No, we've never seen that in the tests that we've done. I'm sure it's a possible effect because you just never know what's in the soil that might get activated. But from the frass itself, there's never been any growth like that. So that's not typically been something that we've noticed in any of the trials that we've done.
And the microbiology that you're seeing in the frass, is it strictly bacteria or maybe archaea in the
There,
frass
there's some
itself?
there's some fungal microbes as well. Yeah, man, I wish my microbiologist Ola was able to join us. So she's done a lot of work on, everything from what's inside the mealworms to then, of course, what ends up outside in the frass. And yeah, we've seen all kinds of fungal microbia. It's kind of across, it spans, the whole spectrum of what you might expect. And we don't have at this time any particular treatment for the frass. We're trying to maintain as much of that natural microbiota as we can. So we're not doing any kind of heat treatment or sterilization because we do know that there's some of that. Certainly it's something we can do for a customer if they're concerned, but we see a lot of value in maintaining that natural, good microbial consortia that is valuable for soil.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest benefit is probably the biological aspects. So I'm glad to hear that it is microbial active,
Yeah.
and you're not
Well,
sterilizing it.
right. Well, and I think that the chitin component as well is something that we're very interested in continuing to explore. So that's not necessarily, it's not something live in and of itself, but it nourishes naturally existent microbes in the soil to help defend against some of these pathogens that can impact different types of plants. And so that's another area that we're going to be working on doing some future testing, and we have ways in our process of kind of increasing how much chitin content there is in the frass. And so we see that as an interesting opportunity down the road as we, start to learn more and more about the products that we have, which we know are great. Just finding ways to make them even better is something that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, now I think that was most of my questions. Was there anything else you'd like to share regarding your company or mealworm frass or mealworm production before we sign off?
Well, I would just remind everyone they can always check out our website, betahatch.com, if they have a query or want to find out more about getting some product. Right now, Chubby Mealworms is our key customer on the mealworm side. They're carrying our American grown mealworms, so that's the best place if you want to buy some mealworms. They'll also be carrying frass as in the next few weeks, and so great place to buy our products. And yeah, we're very excited for next year. We've got a facility we're building over in the Wenatchee area that should come online early next year. And hopefully by next summer, we'll be producing close to a ton a day of mealworms and several tons a day of frass. And so there'll be a lot more of that product available. We're really excited to be getting this out to folks to be growing some great food next year and getting their gardens and their compost piles started.
Yeah, that's great. I know we received some of the frass in as well for our inventory, and I look forward to getting it out to some of our customers and listeners as well. But I think it's a really exciting product, and I love what you guys are doing from a sustainability perspective. And I thank you for your time
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. It was a great conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to connect. Thank you.
That was Virginia Emery with Beta Hatch, and you are listening to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. We are now offering Beta Hatch Frass on our website if you want to try it out in your garden. Don't forget to check out the podcast page at www.kisorganics.com. Just click on the Learn tab and then podcast. And please leave us a review on whatever platform you listen on. I do read them all and appreciate the feedback. Thanks for listening.